Let me start with something that almost no one is talking about correctly. Everyone saw the headline, Rushing Demoted, Roberts Furious, the locker room in shock. But if you only read the headline, you missed the real story. Because what happened in that second inning between Shohei Ohtani and Ryan Rushing wasn't just a moment of tension. It was a test of character. And Rushing failed it in the most public way possible. Let's set the scene properly, because context is everything here. Ohtani was at the plate in the second inning. He had already been working the count carefully, the way he always does when he's feeling out a pitcher. And then, after a pitch that Ohtani clearly believed was outside the zone, he turned to the umpire and invoked the ABS challenge, the automated ball strike review system that MLB has been rolling out as part of its technology integration program. That's his right. Every batter has it. What happened next is what shocked everyone inside that stadium. Rushing, still on the mound, immediately showed visible displeasure. Not at the umpire. Not at the system. At Ohtani. And according to multiple sources who were inside the Dodgers dugout that day, what Rushing said and did in response to Ohtani's challenge request crossed a line that veterans in that organization had never seen crossed before. The words Ohtani said to Rushing in that second inning have now been revealed. And they weren't aggressive. They weren't confrontational. By all accounts, Ohtani looked at Rushing and said something to the effect of, "I'm just using what the rules allow. That's all this is." Calm. Professional. Measured. Exactly what you'd expect from a player of his experience and stature. Rushing's response was the opposite of all three of those things. Now, from a baseball perspective, this is where it gets really interesting. Because the ABS challenge isn't just a technology novelty. It changes the psychological dynamic between pitcher and hitter in ways that people haven't fully processed yet. When a batter successfully challenges a pitch, it doesn't just reverse the call. It sends a message to the pitcher: I am paying close enough attention to know when you're wrong. And for a pitcher like Rushing, who relies heavily on painting corners and working the edges of the zone, that kind of message from Ohtani specifically, a hitter with arguably the most refined pitch recognition in the game today, would feel like someone dismantling your toolkit in real time. That's the part that makes Rushing's reaction understandable on a human level, even if it's completely indefensible on a professional one. What did Rushing actually do? According to what's now been confirmed, he refused to continue pitching in the manner that the challenge process required. When the ABS system validated Ohtani's challenge and the call was reversed, Rushing expressed to the umpire that he disagreed with the process itself, not just the outcome. He essentially told the umpire that the challenge system shouldn't apply in that moment. That he had information, his own read of the pitch, that superseded the technology. The umpire, correctly, informed Rushing that the process is not optional. Rushing's explanation after the game was, in his own words, that he felt the ABS system had been incorrectly calibrated for his pitch movement. That his cutter breaks in a way that the sensors don't capture accurately. That it was a technological failure, not a failure on his part. Manager Dave Roberts heard that explanation. And his response has now become one of the most quoted lines of this entire early season. That's nothing but an excuse. That's it. 4 words. No elaboration. No softening. Roberts didn't hold a long press conference about it. He didn't try to walk it back or protect his player diplomatically. He said what he saw: a pitcher who refused accountability, invented a justification, and in doing so showed that he wasn't ready to compete at this level right now. The demotion to AAA came within 48 hours. Now here's what I think people need to understand about why Roberts drew that line so hard and so fast. This isn't just about Ryan Rushing. This is about organizational culture. The Dodgers, more than almost any franchise in baseball, have built their identity around adaptability. Around using every technological and analytical tool available. Around trusting the process even when individual results are frustrating. When a player publicly rejects one of those tools, and does so in a way that disrespects an opponent in the process, he isn't just making a personal mistake. He's signaling that he doesn't buy into what this organization stands for. Roberts couldn't let that stand for even a day, let alone a series. From a pitching perspective, the deeper issue with Rushing's behavior is what it reveals about his confidence in his own stuff. Think about it this way. If you truly believe your cutter is elite, if you believe your pitch movement is that sharp and that deceptive, then the ABS system confirming or denying one pitch in one at-bat shouldn't rattle you. You go back to your mechanics, you execute the next pitch, and you let the results speak over time. That's what a confident pitcher does. What Rushing did instead was panic. He saw Ohtani challenge him, he knew the system validated Ohtani's read, and instead of responding with the next pitch, he responded with an argument. That's not the behavior of a pitcher who trusts his arsenal. That's the behavior of a pitcher who already knows, somewhere in the back of his mind, that his stuff isn't as reliable as he needs it to be right now. And that's a problem you can't fix by sending the pitcher down for 2 weeks and calling him back up. That's a mental issue that needs to be addressed properly, which is probably another reason why Roberts made the call he made. Now let's talk about Ohtani's role in this, because it's important not to simplify him into a passive victim of someone else's bad behavior. What Ohtani showed in that second inning was exactly the kind of quiet dominance that makes him so difficult to pitch against. He didn't argue. He didn't gesture. He didn't try to make the moment bigger than it was. He simply used a rule that exists in the game, confirmed his own read was correct, and then walked to first base like nothing happened. Like it was the most routine thing in the world. For Rushing, standing on the mound watching that, it must have felt like being dismissed. Not insulted. Dismissed. There's a difference. Being insulted means someone thinks you're worth engaging with. Being dismissed means someone barely notices you're there. Ohtani's composure, his refusal to make the moment theatrical, communicated something devastating without a single raised voice. The words he said, patient, factual, restrained, were almost worse than if he'd argued. Because they made Rushing's subsequent reaction look even more disproportionate by comparison. What I find most telling about this entire situation is the reaction from Ohtani's teammates. There was no visible celebration. No pile-on. The Dodgers dugout, by all accounts, treated it as a non-event. And that collective composure is itself a statement. It says, this is who we are, this is how we handle these moments, and we don't need to make noise about it because the result speaks for itself. Rushing, who is still relatively early in establishing himself at the major league level, learned a brutal lesson about what it looks like when an organization's culture runs straight through its best player. Ohtani didn't need to raise his voice. Roberts only needed 4 words. The system handled the rest. The most important question coming out of this isn't whether Rushing can come back from the demotion. Plenty of pitchers have come back from disciplinary situations and rebuilt their standing. The real question is whether he comes back understanding that the game has changed, that the tools available to hitters and managers and front offices have fundamentally shifted what it means to compete at this level. The ABS challenge isn't going away. Players who resist it, who treat accountability as a personal attack, are going to keep finding themselves on the wrong side of decisions like the one Dave Roberts made this week. Ohtani already knows this. He's been adapting his game continuously, as a hitter, as a pitcher, as a base runner, as a presence. That adaptability is exactly what makes him impossible to contain for 6 innings on a good day. And it's what makes a moment like Tuesday's second inning feel, to everyone watching carefully, less like a confrontation and more like a lesson. Ryan Rushing was the student. He just didn't know he was in class.